I can't even look at him. He freaks me out. I'm sorry if this discomforts you both, but we can't go back to the house with him. Even worse, Freddy is afraid of how he looks. He can barely bring his friends home.
My grandparents were livid.
How can you say such in front of your son? Just because he has a disease doesn't make him scary.
I feel ashamed. How can you both be so selfish and heartless? He's your son just as much as Freddy is. If you leave him here today, I promise you, I will not allow you both have any rights over him.
We never wanted it. We're fine with Freddy. You can both keep the sick one. He might die soon anyway. Those itchy patches will drive him crazy. You can deal with it.
My name is Ollie, and I suffer from a skin condition called psoriasis. I was born with it, and apparently, my parents didn't like that. The disease caused red and scaly patches on my skin, giving me a rough look. My twin brother, Freddy, on the other hand, didn't have it. He was born with great skin and a more handsome face. He also had jet black curly hair, while I had ginger, straight, and thin hair. I envied my brother a lot. While growing up, my parents were very clear about who they loved the most among us. While they made me wear thick clothes that didn't show any skin, my brother was free to wear whatever he wanted. The thick clothes they made me wear caused irritation to my skin and made my condition even worse. When we were out, I would try to take in the discomfort and control myself until we were home. Sometimes I succeeded. Other times, I didn't. On days like that, I would burst into tears, begging them to take some of the clothes off. However, my parents would refuse and silence me. They didn't want anyone knowing about my condition, so they preferred to have me crying and in discomfort than to help me. It got to a point where they stopped taking me with them, as even my cries were embarrassing for them. Although it hurt to see them taking just my brother, I was relieved to be at home. My brother, on the other hand, rarely spoke to me. He'd requested to be in a different room around the time we were 6. According to him, he felt uncomfortable around me and had nightmares about me turning into a monster. Of course, my parents had us separated. Once we began sleeping in different rooms, my brother became a completely different person. He refused to speak to me and only did when he needed to warn me against getting closer to him. I tried to speak to him about his behavior and preach about love between siblings, but he was quick to shut me up. I'm not your brother. I can't be brothers with a monster like you. Don't you see how different we look? Truthfully, we were different. We had only a slight resemblance. Most people hardly believed we were twins. After failing to talk to him, I decided to back off completely. I was alone in my family. About the time when my twin and I were 9, my parents stopped me from eating with them in the dining room. According to their reason, Freddy was scared of my condition since it was getting worse. But it isn't contagious. I heard the doctor say that.
Well, your brother is scared and the only thing we can do is protect him. Honestly, I also don't believe the doctor's words. I can't have you infecting us with this.
I'd never felt so hurt and betrayed. I began eating in my room all alone. Even worse, they got me separate dishes and cutlery, as they didn't want me sharing theirs for fear of contracting my disease. It was enough that I was bullied at school for it, but it was unfair that even my family were doing the same. I was treated as though I had the worst disease ever. One afternoon, I was in my room when I heard someone enter the house. I'd been waiting for my parents, as I needed to tell them about some things I had to get at school. Once I heard the door open, I rushed out of my room. I knew I wouldn't be able to speak to them if they weren't in the living room, as I was prohibited from going into their room. However, on getting to the living room, instead of my parents, I met my brother with a young girl about our age, and 3 boys who had tough expressions on. "What the hell are you doing? Who asked you to come out?" I explained to him my reason for being in the living room, but he didn't believe. "I know you did this intentionally. You came out to embarrass me before my friends with your disease." I couldn't believe him. How could he think I'd intentionally bring myself out to his friends? I mean, Freddy wasn't as smart as him, so I never expected him to be highly sensible. But I didn't think he'd be so dumb. He yelled at me and asked me to return to my room. I didn't argue. I immediately turned away and went back to my hole. It continued that way until I was 10, and my family decided that they'd had enough of me and needed me out of their lives. Firstly, they stopped me from going to school because my flare-ups had gotten worse. I thought they'd get me a home tutor, but they didn't do that. My education was paused indefinitely, and I was left alone at home every day while my parents went to work, and my brother school. 2 months later, it was my and Freddie's birthday. I'd anticipated a little celebration since it was our 10th one, but I got disappointed. On our birthday, while I got locked in my room, a birthday party was held for my twin. I didn't get any wishes or even a cake from my parents. All I got was a bowl of cereal, and I was forgotten for the rest of the day until the next morning.
Make the house sparkling clean before we return home.
I was so pissed. How could they ignore me and still make me clean after the celebration? I would refuse, but I couldn't bring myself to disobey my mother. I cleaned everywhere like I'd been asked to, and quickly returned to my room afterward. About 3 months later, they took me with them to my grandparents. They hadn't seen me for a while, so they were shocked to see how bad my condition was. As they were offering ways to help me control it, my parents suddenly stood up. We have to leave now. We didn't plan to stay for long. I'd felt bad and wondered why they brought me if it was going to be so short. My grandparents were also vocal about not wanting me to leave soon. My parents' next words shocked me. We're not going with him. We're leaving him here with you. We can't take care of him any longer.
I can't even look at him. He freaks me out. I'm sorry if this discomforts you both, but we can't go back to the house with him. Even worse, Freddie is afraid of how he looks. He can barely bring his friends home.
My grandparents were livid.
How can you say such in front of your son? Just because he has a disease doesn't make him scary.
I feel ashamed. How can you both be so selfish and heartless? He's your son just as much as Freddie is. If you leave him here today, I promise you, I will not allow you both have any rights over him.
We never wanted it. We're fine with Freddie. You can both keep the sick one. He might die soon anyway. Those itchy patches will drive him crazy. You can deal with it.
Not only was I hurt, my heart was completely shattered. How could my parents treat me so unfairly? As I watched them leave, I couldn't find any tears. My eyes ached, but I couldn't cry. My grandparents comforted me and assured me that I'd be fine with them. They did stick to their words. They took me to a good hospital where new drugs were administered to me. According to them, my situation hadn't gotten better, mostly because I had been taking cheap drugs that could barely do anything. Luckily, my grandparents were both wealthy and loved me. I was homeschooled for 1 year until my situation improved. The flare-ups had reduced, and my skin had become nearly clear due to the skincare routine I was following alongside my drugs. I was registered at a private school afterward, which was 1 year and 3 months later. All the while, my parents never checked on me. In fact, they moved to another city, according to what I heard from my grandparents. Time flew, and I was finally done with college. I was 23 then, and my grandparents had gotten older. My grandfather had a company. It was so popular, but I could see that it had the potential to be. I talked to him about my ideas, and he made me the vice president so I could bring the ideas to life. And I did. Barely 2 years later, the company's fame had skyrocketed. Unfortunately, my grandparents both died in their sleep after my 25th birthday. It was so heartbreaking for me, as they were the only family members I had. I ensured to give them a befitting funeral. My parents suddenly showed up one day after their funeral. They were demanding for the company. According to them, I didn't belong to the family, so I didn't deserve it. I argued that I was, since I was their son, but they refused.
We disowned you 15 years ago, so you aren't a part of our family. Leave the company to us.
I refused. I wasn't going to let them take the company I'd worked so hard for. Fortunately, while we were arguing, a man walked in and introduced himself as my grandfather's lawyer. He also revealed that my grandfather wrote his will. My parents immediately began dancing in excitement. We all sat down, and the lawyer began. It was very brief. Apparently, my grandfather had more properties than I thought, and also a fat bank account. And well, he willed 90% of his properties to me, and the other 10% to orphanages around. My parents couldn't believe their ears. They tried to argue, but the lawyer also provided a video of my grandfather saying it, so they were convinced that it wasn't a lie. They immediately went on their knees, begging me.
Your brother is in a critical condition. Help us, please.
It turned out that my brother had been living a very wayward life. He was a thief, a gambler, a liar, among other things. He'd gotten my parents in and out of jail several times. The last one that landed him in the hospital was worse. He'd broken into someone's house to steal, but a fire had started, and he got trapped in. Before he could be rescued, he'd gotten burnt severely. He was at a hospital and needed treatment immediately, but my parents had gone broke. They'd used their money in paying off several debts he owed. Before the fire incident, they were forced to sell their first house to pay a gang he'd gambled with, and with the remaining money, they'd gotten a smaller house. They'd planned to pay my brother's bill and move to a bigger house, but they got no inheritance. I had no plan to render any help to them. I chased them out, threatening to report them to the cops if they dared to show themselves before me again. That was the only way I could get back at them for abandoning me. The universe showed its back to them once again. By the time they reached home, they discovered that the community had burned their small house, alongside everything they had in it. Apparently, they'd found out that Freddy had accidentally caused the fire while he was trying to steal from the family. There was a candle on, and he'd kicked something that hit it. The only way to get back at him was to burn my parents' house. They cried their eyes out, but no one came to their aid. They had no one to turn to. My brother eventually passed away, and my parents were forced to get menial jobs where the pay could barely even feed them well. They slept in the streets, where they often got beaten by dangerous guys. Meanwhile, my psoriasis was continuously kept under control, and no one knew unless I told them. I got married a few years later and had 2 beautiful kids with my wife. As for my parents, well, I heard about their demise 2 weeks after it happened. They had been robbed and stabbed by some crazy gang members for a few dollars. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. In an attempt to silence me. Why can't you be as calm and polite as Nikki? All you know how to do is complain.
If you're so unhappy in this family, leave. Anyway, you don't contribute much to the household. You're more of a hindrance.
The problem began with threats to refuse to pay for my university expenses and ended with my parents kicking me out of the house as soon as I turned 18. It was a terrible time for me. With nowhere to go and not enough money to sustain myself, I had to rely on all my ingenuity to avoid ending up on the streets. I don't think I come from a dysfunctional family, or at least I didn't think so when I was little. My family always treated me well, providing me with all the love and care necessary despite never being in the best economic situation. And indeed, that's how it continued during the first years of my life, in a practically idyllic harmony where, although I was never the favored one at home, they never denied me basic attention. Everything began to change, without me even realizing it, when my brother Nicky was born.
Now that you're going to become a big brother, you'll have to take on more responsibilities and help us always ensure his well-being. Understood?
My father stated this with pride, thus passing on his own excitement about having a new member in the family to me. And although at first I didn't understand why everyone was so excited, soon the reason why all the adults around me were so thrilled became clear. This is something I learned many years later, well into adolescence, but my own birth was not planned. Rather, it was the result of a careless night of partying and drunkenness. There was nothing wrong with it. Or, better said, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it at that time. But many things that I considered as unchangeable truths in my early youth would soon be shaken. Nicky turned out to be the perfect child in my parents' eyes, not only because of his beauty, but also because of his friendly character and all the successes he seemed destined to achieve from a very young age. Not only my parents, but everyone who knew him didn't hesitate to shower him with compliments, praising him for his good looks and his good behavior. Soon, the comparisons began.
Caleb, why can't you be a bit more like your brother? Look how sociable he is. They've barely met the neighbor's son and they're already playing as if they've been friends for a lifetime.
But Mom, he's 3 years old. Anyone who approaches you at 3 years old, you consider them your friend.
Not only should you be more sociable, but also improve your grades. Who goes to 3rd grade and doesn't have an A in all subjects? Surely Nicky could do better. He can already read and do sums. He's way ahead of his peers.
He actually only knows a few letters and can count to 10.
Jealousy is a very bad thing, son. It corrodes the soul.
Perhaps my mother was right, and feeling jealous was a waste of time. But my relatives did nothing to prevent me from feeling overshadowed by my younger brother. On the contrary, whenever Nicky did something even remotely praiseworthy, no matter how routine or irrelevant it seemed to me, they found a way to turn it into a commendable feat. The comparisons became a daily occurrence. At first, they were minor things like, "Why can't you clean your room as neatly as your brother?" Or, "You need to dress better. You have enough decent clothes not to go around looking like a vagabond. Look at your brother, always so handsome." But gradually, as the years passed, they escalated. And they not only criticized me for things I did wrong, but also used the things I did well to reproach me for not doing better.
Don't let it get to your head. I'm not that good, and you're not that bad.
That's hard to believe when every moment of the day they make sure to remind me otherwise, as if instead of having 2 children, they only had 1. And the remaining teenager was just a random person they had to deal with out of obligation, never out of personal affection.
Do you want me to talk to them?
If you could do me that favor, they'll listen to you for sure. They always listened to Nicky, no matter what he said. So it was a surprise to discover that this turned out to be the exception that proved the rule. Nicky, who did try to fulfill the promise he had made to me and convince my parents to treat me better, was completely ignored when he brought up the issue. Not only did our parents change the subject as soon as either of us tried to call their attention to it, but once they got tired of giving us the runaround, they flat out told us that we were imagining things and that they loved us both equally. If they were stricter with me, to the point of giving me more chores at home than I deserved, it was only because they wanted the best for me and knew I could strive for more. They indulged Nicky in everything, giving him gifts and sparing him responsibilities, while burdening me with more work and reproaches that often had no basis. Why can't I sign up for guitar classes? I've gotten excellent grades in all my subjects, as we agreed I would.
There isn't enough money. Besides, why would you do extracurricular activities? That's a waste of time. You have things to do at home.
But the classes are free. The school provides them, and they even lend the instruments themselves.
Your father already told you no, you don't have time for those nonsense activities.
The curious thing was that there was always time and money to waste for Nicky. As soon as he showed interest in an activity, no matter how impractical it was, my parents went out of their way to make sure he could attend. And Nicky wasn't a bad person. He had shown that on numerous occasions when he tried to help me get a fairer deal. But he wasn't the perfect being. Everyone claimed he was either. My brother was too impulsive and indecisive. The activity that brought him pleasure today could hold 0 interest for him the following week. It was inconvenient for me, but my parents seemed unfazed, blinded as they were by the halo of splendor they saw in Nicky. Needless to say, they didn't demand the perfect scores from him that they expected from me. At first, when I was very young, I tolerated this. But as I grew up and realized that instead of changing, the situation was escalating, my complaints became more constant, to the point that my parents were forced to confront me and punish me more often in an attempt to silence me.
Why can't you be as calm and polite as Nicky? All you know how to do is complain.
If you're so unhappy in this family, leave. Anyway, you don't contribute much to the household. You're more of a hindrance.
The problem began with threats to refuse to pay for my university expenses and ended with my parents kicking me out of the house as soon as I turned 18. It was a terrible time for me. With nowhere to go and not enough money to sustain myself, I had to rely on all my ingenuity to avoid ending up on the streets. I survived thanks to the kindness of some friends who let me stay in their home until I could afford an apartment. I abandoned my educational opportunities in favor of getting a job to survive. And yes, after a few years, I managed to stabilize and start a new life away from parents who rejected me shamelessly. I lost contact with them, although I still occasionally spoke to Nicky, as he was the only one who still cared about me and even sent me some money in those first few months when I struggled to save enough to support myself.
Our parents are in debt. They're trying to hide it from me, so I don't worry, but I know what's going on. I'm not blind.
Let them dig themselves out of the hole on their own. They're old enough to know how to spend their meager fortune.
You know very well that they waste too much, and their carpentry business is about to collapse. Couldn't you lend them a hand now that you're doing well?
Why would I help them after everything they did to me? You helped them, since they treated you so well. Nicky did want to help, but contrary to what our relatives predicted, things weren't going so well for him in life. At 20, he had dropped out of university to take a gap year traveling around Europe, which my parents funded without sparing any expenses. And now that he was back in the country, he had taken on a part-time job at a fast food chain that obviously didn't pay very well. As for me, I had managed to stabilize my life and resume my studies. I got a job at a veterinary clinic, which provided me with a good salary and even allowed me to save some money. I had no interest in getting involved with my parents again, so I wished Nikki luck and completely washed my hands of the matter. It was several months later when I found out that my parents' financial problems had escalated to the point where they were about to have their car and house repossessed. The police had already knocked on their door, and from what I could gather, they were also being investigated for fraud.
It's all a mistake, Caleb. You must help us. We didn't realize the debts had piled up so much, and we needed the money to give you and Nikki a better future.
Only to Nikki, rather. And yet I can see that you've squandered a lot on indulgences for yourselves.
Don't be like that. We did everything we could to give you a good childhood. It's just that you were always a very rebellious child, always demanding more than we could give.
My parents begged for help, but beyond offering some advice, I didn't extend a helping hand. Everything I had built from the age of 18 until that moment was the result of my own efforts, and I wasn't going to let anyone convince me otherwise. However, other people weren't so forgiving. As it turned out, my parents had borrowed a great deal of money from people they knew and refused to pay them back. Some of those people were their customers or suppliers, and they owed tens of thousands of dollars to many of them. Some were so angry that they even spray painted the words "liar" on the side of my parents' house. On top of that, their home was broken into several times, and much of their belongings were stolen. Even their cars were broken into and stolen. For me, though, I never considered seeking revenge as such. However, things for my parents finally crossed the point of no return when they were finally arrested for embezzlement. After the police took them away, a local newspaper contacted me to interview me about them and my childhood. It may not have been my intention to publicly humiliate them, but by telling the truth about how they kicked me out of the house, that's exactly what happened. As for Nikki, well, I made sure to take care of him, and he moved in with me. In the end, I went from being a pariah, rejected by my own parents, to having free access to the family properties again and being seen almost as a hero in the media, while my parents had to serve a long sentence. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more stories.
I always knew you wouldn't get anywhere, Arthur, with that arrogant attitude. You think you can do anything without consequences.
Excuse me, but we're in the middle of a funeral. Could you please leave so we can continue?
Actually, yes, it does matter. I came to get my employee, and I'm not leaving without him.
That's when things got out of control. My boss grabbed my arm and tried to drag me towards the exit. Of course, I tried to free myself from his grip, which made him even angrier, and he started shouting, insulting me, and telling everyone how terrible an employee I was, stopping even to criticize the smallest mistake I had made in the office to make me look like the bad guy. He was out of his mind, not seeming to realize where we were, and that there were at least 100 people in the room who needed silence to continue the ceremony. When he saw his verbal tantrum was going nowhere, he tried to use force again. He couldn't grab me again, but he started throwing punches and kicks at anyone who tried to stop him. You need to stop this madness. This is a funeral. Just shut up. Then my boss punched the priest. The security had to be called to remove my boss from the premises. Hi, my name is Arthur, and I have been working at an insurance company for more than 6 years. Although I do my job decently, always arriving punctually and ensuring a minimum number of sales per month, I don't think I could consider myself the company's #1 employee. Rather, given my shy nature and day-to-day performance, I could be considered just another worker. I didn't have any special talent for my duties, but I was not lacking in enthusiasm and willingness to learn. Maybe that's why, despite not advancing in my position, I became the veteran whom my colleagues admired and got along with well enough to form friendships that extended beyond work hours. And yes, I loved working there. The feeling with those people was mutual. The only problem, or inconvenience, was my boss. A despot who had been in his position long enough to believe he had the right to treat others like mere insects he could step on. Arthur, the marketing plan you made for the new alarms is absolute garbage. You need to redo it by the end of the day. But I've already redone it twice before. What do you expect if you don't put any effort into it? Do you think I'll just accept it as it is? The target audience is wrong, and I also don't like how you outlined the promotion strategy. Why didn't you tell me that before when I submitted the plan last time? Don't talk back to me. That's all I needed. You'll be staying late until you finish it properly, even if it's 2 in the morning. The client wants this ready for tomorrow, and so it shall be. My boss often made me redo entire plans, making me stay at the company for countless extra hours without any additional pay. He would also insult me frequently, saying my work was worthless, and that even the guy hired just to run errands and serve him coffee was more capable than I was at producing the necessary reports. But despite all these insults and threats, my boss never fired me. On the contrary, he made sure to squeeze my time to the maximum, giving me as many tasks as possible. It almost seemed like he wanted to enslave me to the company, regardless of what I might think. Initially, I thought it was just my imagination, that any day now, my boss would get tired and hire someone more capable than me, someone who wouldn't talk back when he crossed the line with his orders. However, I realized that would never happen when my partner fell ill. I need to take a few days off to take care of her. Oh no, absolutely not. Do you think I'm going to pay you to go off on vacation with your girl whenever you feel like it? I already gave you a month a year. You should be grateful and stop being greedy by asking for more. It's not for a vacation, it's to accompany her to the hospital. She's undergoing major surgery. And those weeks of vacation you give me annually are what I'm legally entitled to. I don't need to be grateful for them. How dare you? Of course, I'm not going to let you go just like that. You say you're going to the hospital, but who knows if that's true? No, you'll stay, or I'll deduct it from your pay. In the end, I was able to accompany my partner, but at the cost of losing a small part of my salary and having to work twice, or even 3 times as much when I returned to the office. I knew it wasn't fair, and that if I reported it, the authorities would be on my side, and I would get justice. But at that time, my partner was already in such poor health that her well-being became my complete priority. I didn't want to get into disputes with my boss. I didn't have the time or energy for it, since I just wanted to focus on helping my partner recover from that damned illness. Unfortunately, even with my help and the doctor's efforts, she didn't survive. The funeral will be on Thursday, so I'll need to be absent to attend. What are you saying? We have a vital presentation with one of our main clients the next day, and we need to use the time to prepare. Denied. It's not a question of whether I can go or not. It's something I must do. As your boss, I must warn you that this cannot happen. Otherwise, I'll fire you. Then fire me. I was going to take leave after the funeral, but if this way I can get some rest, it'll serve me just as well. That enraged my boss so much that he started shouting at me and throwing things off his desk, loudly claiming I had no right to speak to him like that, and much less to leave him hanging in an important meeting on such short notice. I didn't care. I knew I wasn't essential at work because my boss had made it clear in the past. So, no matter what, I was going to that funeral, then take a break, and afterward, I would probably report my boss for unfair dismissal or whatever was appropriate. What I knew for sure was that I wasn't going back to that toxic work environment. My plan was to postpone the complaint until after the funeral, until I felt better emotionally. However, nothing prepared me for the next day when, right in the middle of the ceremony, my boss showed up at the church, interrupting the service just as it was beginning. Arthur, I finally found you. It's unbelievable that you decided to come here, to an ugly church in the middle of nowhere instead of fulfilling your work schedule. You should be ashamed. What? I already told you I wasn't coming back to work. I even left a resignation letter in the HR department, clarifying that I would come next week to finalize the exit procedures. Exactly, so you're still not gone, and you owe me work these days at least. Otherwise, I'll have to report you for breach of contract. Breach of contract? Me? I always knew you wouldn't get anywhere, Arthur, with that arrogant attitude. You think you can do anything without consequences. Excuse me, but we're in the middle of a funeral. Could you please leave so we can continue? Actually, yes, it does matter. I came to get my employee, and I'm not leaving without him. That's when things got out of control. My boss grabbed my arm and tried to drag me towards the exit. Of course, I tried to free myself from his grip, which made him even angrier. And he started shouting, insulting me, and telling everyone how terrible an employee I was, stopping even to criticize the smallest mistake I had made in the office to make me look like the bad guy. He was out of his mind, not seeming to realize where we were, and that there were at least 100 people in the room who needed silence to continue the ceremony. When he saw his verbal tantrum was going nowhere, he tried to use force again. He couldn't grab me again, but he started throwing punches and kicks at anyone who tried to stop him. You need to stop this madness. This is a funeral. Just shut up. Then my boss punched the priest. The security had to be called to remove my boss from the premises. What no one expected was that suddenly the CEO of our company appeared, who apparently had been sitting in one of the back pews of the church, watching everything unfold. And as if by magic, my boss stopped the violence before they could throw him out. "What are you doing here?" "Indeed, you don't know. The deceased was a good friend of my daughter."
Yes, well, I'm very sorry for the spectacle, but I had no other choice. My employee left work without proper notice."
"That's not true. I did give notice. He just ignored it."
"Don't worry, Arthur. I think we'll find a fair solution to this inconvenience."
With that said, the CEO apologized to me and my family for the trouble before ordering my boss to follow him out of the church. And my boss, seeing the imminent disaster, let himself be led without resistance. A few days later, when I returned to the office to collect my things and finalize the procedures to leave the company, I found out what had happened. Apparently, the CEO was so disgusted with my boss's behavior that he fired him. That surprised me because I always thought those two were friends, and that no matter what my boss did, the CEO would end up forgiving him. Well, in work matters, that wasn't the case. The CEO did speak with the funeral staff and my family to prevent them from filing a complaint against my boss, even giving us a generous sum of money for the inconvenience. But that little generosity for his friend, so he wouldn't end up in jail, was all he did for him. And once they were alone, he had no qualms about firing him and warning him that he would never work in any known company in the city if he could help it. My boss spent a few more days behind bars, mainly for the assault on the priest and several funeral guests, but finally got out of there, without a job, and with no one to sympathize with his actions.
"Arthur, the CEO wants to see you."
"Me? I thought we agreed I was leaving today. If it's about the complaint..."
"No, it's about work. You'd better see him before resigning."
The CEO never mentioned my ex-boss again. On the contrary, he told me he had been reviewing my work performance over the past few years and realized I was doing twice or 3 times as much as my ex-boss, and that the reports I submitted were considerably better. Hence, he not only wanted to offer me to stay with the company, but he also wanted to promote me, either taking the vacant position or even choosing another that I liked more. He didn't pressure me to return, instead giving me time to think it over. But in the end, I decided on a yes. The work would keep me occupied after the loss, and it was always nice to know that I could earn more and gain more prestige for doing the job I enjoyed. As for my ex-boss, he had no possibility of working in the same sector again, after having gone through the public humiliation of almost ending up in jail. People from the funeral had made videos of my boss and posted on TikTok. When my ex-boss was released from jail, someone set fire to his house the same day, causing significant damage, and he had to do repairs. Due to all the doxing, his wife became scared for her life as people began attacking them. She filed for divorce and left my ex-boss. They never had any children. My boss then got a new girlfriend, but someone tipped her off about his past, and she dumped him. My ex-boss became so depressed that he started talking to himself. The last I heard about him, he had gotten a job as a janitor to survive, since no company wanted to hire a crazy and violent man. People constantly made fun of him in his current job. They would often send photos of him from the funeral to his house. He had no choice but to run away from Texas. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
I saw that my jealous father-in-law had seen our loving embrace, and it filled him with rage once again. He burst through the door and came charging at me full speed. He tackled me to the ground and began punching me in the gut. Ethan restrained him as quickly as he could, but it was too late. I was bleeding. Growing up, we are always told not to hit women. I thought this was something everyone could have agreed on, but I guess my monster father-in-law thought differently. My name is Abby, I'm 26 years old, and I recently went through the most traumatic event of my life. Me and my father-in-law's relationship had always been pretty rocky, even when I first started dating my boyfriend Ethan, who is now my husband. The first time I ever met Ethan's dad, Rick, was one of the worst days of my life. We had already been dating for a couple of months, and I was excited to meet his parents. Upon entering their home, I was met with a very welcoming mother, but a very angry and sexist father. Rick immediately started taking shots at me, making comments about my outfit being too revealing, and asking perverted questions about my past. Ethan was an amazing boyfriend, and he apologized for his father's actions and begged me to forget it and continue dating him, which I did. Fast forward many years and memories later, and me and Ethan had finally tied the knot. Our wedding had been amazing, except for Rick causing a scene during me and Ethan's dance, saying that we were dancing too promiscuously. Only a few months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant, and me and Ethan couldn't be happier. Well, that all changed when I went to Ethan's parents' house yet again to announce our pregnancy. His mom's reaction was just as you would expect. She was thrilled to hear she would be a grandma, while his father's was the opposite of what you would expect. He broke out into a rage and began screaming at me.
Are you serious, Abby? You dirty, dirty girl. I can't believe you could be so irresponsible. Why weren't you using protection?
I couldn't believe Rick was getting so personal and prying into me and my husband's life. What was his problem anyway? We were married, and it is completely normal to have children after marriage. I believe his anger comes from a strange form of jealousy he has over his son, because secretly deep down, I think he might be in love with me. I never had wanted to admit it, and even brought it up to Ethan once. But when I told him about this theory, he laughed it off and said it was completely irrational to think such a thing. I stormed out after this tantrum, and Ethan chased after me, again begging me to forgive his father's words. Again, it was hard to say no to Ethan, so I gave him a hug and a kiss right there in his parents' yard. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that my jealous father-in-law had seen our loving embrace, and it filled him with rage once again. He burst through the door and came charging at me full speed. He tackled me to the ground and began punching me in the gut. Ethan restrained him as quickly as he could, but it was too late. I was bleeding, and Ethan's mom quickly rushed me to the hospital while Ethan continued to restrain his dad. It didn't take the doctors long to determine the cause of my bleeding. I had a miscarriage. The words echoed in my head, and I fell to the ground crying. The baby I once had was now gone, all because of the jealousy of my father-in-law. At least I could rest soundly knowing the sick man who did this would be behind bars, right? That's what I thought, but it turned out that I was wrong. When Ethan finally made it to the hospital after dealing with his dad, he explained what really happened. He told me that the neighbors saw them struggling and called the police. Since they had not seen the whole story, they assumed that Ethan was the one attacking Rick, so that's what they told the police. Ethan said that once the police arrived, they tackled him instead of Rick, and completely sided with Rick. Rick then lied to police and said that Ethan was hurting him and denied everything when Ethan tried to tell them what really happened. The police said that unfortunately, with no evidence, they couldn't do anything, and chalked up the whole incident to being a family problem. My sadness suddenly turned to hatred, and I was filled with a burning sensation of rage. I had to get back at my father-in-law. Justice had to be served. Me, Ethan, and Ethan's mom agreed we needed to take down Rick once and for all. Ethan's mom was the first to give us something to work with. She told us that back when her and Rick had first started dating, he confessed to her that he was once arrested for urinating outside of an elementary school, making him a child sex offender for life. It was a secret he was terrified of getting out, which made it a great place to start. We did some digging and found a picture of his mugshot with the criminal charge listed underneath, and began printing out hundreds of copies. We placed the copies all around town and even sent some into his work. See, Rick worked as an executive producer for a children's TV show, and they were not going to take this lightly. We saw on the news that Rick was publicly fired from his role, and was going viral all over social media being labeled as a pedophile. Once the internet really started to notice this story, Rick's address was doxed. Not long after he was doxed, an angry mob of internet mobsters showed up at Rick's door with weapons of all kinds and began completely destroying his house. We all watched from across the street as Rick's beautiful big house was torn to the ground before the mob set fire to it. The next day, Ethan mentioned he remembered how his dad was always extremely scared of losing money in banks. So instead of depositing money, he would bury it in secret locations. And as it turns out, Ethan was with him one of these times that Rick had buried money, and he knew exactly where it was. It was in a field about 3 miles away, and we rushed there to take it from him. Once we dug in the spot where Ethan swore it was, we finally hit the crate where it was stashed. We couldn't believe our eyes as we realized we must have just broke into Rick's life savings, because the total sum of the money was over $2 million. We quickly loaded it onto Ethan's truck, and we were just about to drive away when Rick came limping over to the hole where his life savings used to be. He was badly bruised and bloodied from the beatings of the angry mob.
My money? Where is it?
It's ours now, we're taking it.
Well, you can't do that. It's mine.
It's what you deserve for killing my baby. I knew he was about to say something incriminating, so I whipped out my phone and hit record.
So what, I beat you up so bad and you went and miscarried? It's not my fault you couldn't take a beating. And honey, why haven't you been home? I miss you.
I'm never going back to you after what you did to Abby. You showed your true colors.
Whatever, I cheated on you all the time anyways. Ethan, what about you, son? Will you stick by your father's side? Absolutely not, Dad. You're a horrible person. Good. I never loved you anyway.
I explained to Rick that I had just got every word of that on video, and that I would send it to the police if he didn't allow us to take his life savings. He practically broke down in tears before finally agreeing to let us keep the money, realizing that the time behind bars would be much worse than being poor. Ethan and I used the money to buy an amazing house on the beach, and we decided to start over, away from the horrors of his horrible father. Ethan's mom spent her share on a one-way ticket to France, where she bought a mansion and fell in love with a wine connoisseur named Felipe. Ethan and I also started a successful charity dedicated to helping mothers who have been victims of abuse, and we are proud to say that we have helped over 100,000 young women back on their feet after dealing with abuse of all kinds. As for Rick, well, he's lived alone on the streets ever since, and those posters we put up and posted online are still circulating, and we've even heard that he still gets beat up to this day by random people who recognize him. I know he's sorry now, but I don't care. Personally, I hope he rots out there. I truly believe it's what he deserves. But what do you think? Do you think we were too harsh on Rick, or maybe even not harsh enough?
Then the night of my bachelor party arrived. My best man Derek had planned it 3 weeks before the wedding, and it was to be a rather tame night. We were going to go out as a group of guys and have steak and then go to a concert. Dinner was amazing, but at the concert I was separated from my friends during the show, and suddenly, 2 very large men grabbed me and dragged me away. They were so much stronger than I was, and although I fought back, they easily overpowered me and threw me into the trunk of a car. I felt the car drive away, and when it finally stopped, the same 2 men pulled me out of the trunk and then knocked me unconscious. When I woke up, I was tied to a chair and couldn't move. I tried to scream, but they had put a gag in my mouth.
Good. You are awake. We don't want any trouble from you so long as you play along. Then in a month, we will set you free.
Hello there. My name is Edward, and I know that some people have horrible in-laws, but my mother-in-law is a next-level sociopath. She did everything in her power to try to stop me from marrying her daughter, and I suppose she thought that she had good reasons, but I honestly think that she is just insane. It all started in high school. I met Amy in my junior year, and the 2 of us bonded over our love of reading. We met in the library and instantly started talking about all the books that we really enjoyed and our favorite authors. By the end of the first year, we were best friends and would go over to each other's houses to watch movies or to play games. However, Amy's mother never really took a liking to me.
Hey Mom, can Edward stay over for dinner?
That annoying brat. Can't you find any friends that aren't poor and leech off of you?
He doesn't leech off of me, Mom. How can you be so mean to him?
It's okay, Amy. I'll just head home. I don't want to be a bother. It was always like that. She never really hid her dislike of me, and I suppose it stemmed from the fact that Amy's family was rather well off and that my family wasn't. In fact, my father worked as a janitor at the factory that Amy's father owned, a fact that Amy's mother always made sure to remind me. When we got older, we both went away to the same business college. Amy had her tuition all paid for by her parents, whereas I was forced to take out student loans and fight for scholarships. Thankfully, I was able to get more than a few though, and in the end, I didn't have to borrow that much money really. It was around the end of our last year that our friendship blossomed into a romantic one, and we realized that we loved each other. Both of us feared telling Amy's mother the good news, as we knew that she wouldn't see it as such. I had no doubt that Amy's mother would reject our relationship and demand that we break up. And sure enough, when we told her, she did exactly that.
Hey, Mom, I have some great news. Edward and I have come to realize that we make better partners than just friends. We are dating.
You can't be serious?
Yes, it's true. We realized that not only are we best friends, but that we love each other as well on a much deeper level as well.
Well, luckily that won't last. I will make sure that Amy breaks up with you, Edward. Simply put, you are not good enough for my daughter.
You're wrong, Mom. He is more than good enough for me. You are completely wrong about us.
So there we were. We knew that she did not give her blessing for our relationship, but neither of us really cared for it. After all, we had always known that she wouldn't be happy about us dating, but that we also did not care whether she did or did not. We loved one another, and that was all that mattered, really. At any rate, we decided that we would keep enjoying our lives, and that maybe one day that her mother would realize that we were a good fit for one another. First off, we needed to figure out what we would be doing for a living. It had always been assumed that Amy would work for her parents' company, but she wanted to strike out on her own and didn't want to rely on her parents' money anymore. I had an idea to buy houses for very cheap, put some work into making the homes beautiful, and then sell them. Amy didn't know much about home renovation, but she was excited to try and help me. And so we bought a small house for next to nothing, and over the course of a couple months, we changed the floors and walls and fixed a lot of things that would have made the house an eyesore. It went from nearly being condemned to something that everyone in the neighborhood wanted to own. A month after we listed it, we sold it for quite a bit more than what we had purchased it for. So much so that we were able to bank some of the money we made and buy another such house. By the time we were working on our fourth house, Amy was a natural at home renovations, and we were really beginning to make some good profit. So much so that we were able to renovate homes incredibly quickly. We eventually bought 2 houses and kept one for ourselves. It was perfect. We made sure that everything either of us could ever want was in the house. Amy wanted a sunroom, and we built one for our home. I wanted a large garage, and we got the permits and created one. It was quickly becoming our dream home, and I even saw it as a sign that I should propose, as I couldn't find anyone who was a better partner for me. I even tried to go to Amy's mother to get her blessing, hoping that she had changed her mind on me. Hi there. Listen, I know we have had a contentious past, but I really love your daughter and I want to marry her.
Never. You can never marry my daughter. I don't know how you've managed to convince her to date you or to waste our money on building your silly homes, but she'll realize that someone like you could never give her the kind of life she deserves.
That's where you're wrong. We make a perfect couple and work extremely well together. And we have never used your money. We have always used our own.
Whatever. You can try, but I'll make sure that you will never marry my daughter.
I don't see how you could stop us. We are in love, and I was just hoping that you would be able to move past this hatred of me and just accept that we make a great team.
You'll see.
The way that she responded made me feel very uncomfortable, but I figured I had tried to get her on board. The next few months were a blur, as Amy and I made wedding plans and got everything sorted for the big day. Then the night of my bachelor party arrived. My best man Derek had planned it 3 weeks before the wedding, and it was to be a rather tame night. We were going to go out as a group of guys and have steak, and then go to a concert. Dinner was amazing, but at the concert I was separated from my friends during the show, and suddenly, 2 very large men grabbed me and dragged me away. They were so much stronger than I was, and although I fought back, they easily overpowered me and threw me into the trunk of a car. I felt the car drive away, and when it finally stopped, the same 2 men pulled me out of the trunk and then knocked me unconscious. When I woke up, I was tied to a chair and couldn't move. I tried to scream, but they had put a gag in my mouth.
Good. You are awake. We don't want any trouble from you so long as you play along. Then in a month, we will set you free.
I nodded, but I was unsure what was going on. My mind raced with the possibilities of why these 2 men had kidnapped me, and why they only planned to hold me for a month, and then it dawned on me. My future mother-in-law must have hired them to prevent me from marrying Amy. It was the only thing that made sense. Luckily, the men would untie me every several hours to go and use the washroom, and during one such visit, I kicked one of the men in crotch and then made a break for the door. The other man tried to grab me, but I was thankfully faster, and once outside, I took off at a full run. I had no idea where I was, but after running for 10 minutes, I happened to encounter a police officer who helped me get home. The police took my description of my kidnappers, and although they listened to my suspicions about my mother-in-law, they didn't have any evidence to connect her to the men that had held me hostage. They basically said that the only way that they could prove that my mother-in-law was involved was if they managed to track the men down and have them confess that my mother-in-law had hired them. Amy thankfully agreed with my assessment and called up her mother to tell her that her plan had failed, only to get hung up on. Then, 20 minutes later, Amy's mother was at our front door.
Edward, you disgusting piece of crap. I tried to play nice. Those men wouldn't have hurt you, but you had to be persistent. Now you leave me with no choice.
My mother-in-law drew a gun and pointed it at me. Terrified, I jumped and ducked behind a wall just as she fired the gun at me. I heard the gun go off 3 or 4 times, and I was incredibly grateful that none of the bullets had hit me. It appeared that she was a terrible shot. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of shattering glass, and then a thump, and when I looked around the corner from my hiding spot, I saw Amy standing over her mother's body. She had hit her mother on the head with a large crystal vase that knocked her out. We then called the police, who rushed over and threw my mother-in-law in handcuffs. She spent that night in jail, and in the morning the police had good news for us. They had found the men that had kidnapped me based on the description of them that I had provided. Not only that, but the men agreed to rat on my mother-in-law in exchange for reduced sentences. They confessed that she hired them to kidnap me and hold me hostage till after the wedding. The plan was that when I didn't show up, that my mother-in-law would then convince Amy that I was no good for her and that I was unreliable. But when that plan failed, that she decided that the only way to prevent me from marrying Amy was to kill me. And so she grabbed her gun and tried to do just that. My mother-in-law was charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The story about how a mother-in-law tried to have her son-in-law killed attracted the attention of the newspapers and local news stations, who all interview Amy and I. Our story spread all over the country and garnered a lot of sympathy for Amy and I. We were even given some serious discounted prices on the next few homes we bought to flip and made an incredible profit off of them. Amy's mother, however, ended up going to prison for 10 years. From what we hear, she isn't doing very well behind bars. The story about how she tried to kill us spread very far indeed, and her fellow inmates did not approve of her foolish ideas. We received reports that at least once a month that she was in the infirmary recovering after a fellow inmate beat her up and either broke a rib or bruised her bad enough for her to need serious medical attention. To this day, she still hates me. As for us, Amy and I eloped and got married on a tropical island. When we got back, we got right back into work, and it didn't take long for our business to begin to thrive. So much so that we now have 4 teams that we hire to renovate houses for us now. We are now making more money than we could ever imagine, and are making plans to expand our family. So yes, I know a lot of people have some pretty awful in-laws, but how many can say that their mother-in-law tried to kill them?